They say you can tell everything about a person by how they treat someone who can do nothing for them. I've found that to be devastatingly true, especially when that someone is a quiet 69-year-old man driving a beat-up 2003 Buick LeSabre who just happens to be worth $3.1 billion. And his arrogant son-in-law has no idea he's about to get absolutely destroyed at a family dinner. My name is William Hayes. I've been that quiet old man my entire life on purpose. At 69 years old, I still drive the same 2003 Buick LeSabre my daughter, Serena, has been hounding me to trade in for 3 straight years. The paint job used to be silver. These days, it's more silver adjacent, faded from decades of sun beating down on it and rain trying to wash the stories away. It doesn't give a damn what anyone thinks anymore, and neither do I. I keep my clothes clean but never flashy. Nothing that screams for attention when I step into a room. I still live in the house I bought 31 years ago on Elmwood Drive, a sleepy street where the oak trees have more rings than most marriages around here, and folks still wave from their porches on Sunday mornings like it's 1,985. The air always carries that faint smell of fresh-cut grass and somebody's barbecue drifting over the fence. My neighbor Bill Patterson, a retired postal worker and decent enough guy despite his god-awful golf swing, once leaned over the chain link on a lazy Saturday afternoon and told me I was the most unfancy rich guy he'd ever met. I just chuckled and said I wasn't rich. He laughed harder. I laughed with him. We spent 20 minutes talking about his tomato garden before I headed back inside. What Bill doesn't know what my church buddies on Sunday mornings don't know? What the eager young salesman at the dealership didn't know. When I politely turned down his pitch with a smile, and the LeSabre is just fine. Son is that I own Cornerstone Group. Real estate, private equity, a media arm, holdings spread across 4 states and 3 countries. Everything structured through so many careful layers that my name barely shows up anywhere obvious. No Forbes list. No gala photos with my face plastered on a banner. No puff piece profile talking about my journey to the top. I built it brick by brick over 40 years of sunrise wake-ups and midnight bedtimes, never once mixing up being seen with actually mattering. The whole operation sits at $3.1 billion, and I still drive a car with a dented side mirror and an air conditioner that works whenever it damn well feels like it. I wouldn't trade a single thing. Now let me tell you about my daughter. Serena Hayes Cross is 34, and without any exaggeration, she's the best thing I've ever put together in this life. Smarter than me, warmer than her mother, God rest her soul. That laugh of hers starts soft, almost shy, then suddenly fills whatever room she's in before she even notices it's happening. The kind of sound that makes strangers smile without knowing why. When she was 7, she once negotiated an extra 30 minutes of TV time for me, with a 3-point argument so tight, I genuinely had no comeback. I sat there on the couch thinking, this kid is going to be dangerous someday. I was right. What I never saw coming was the man she decided to marry 3 years ago. Serena brought Aaron Cross home, and right from the jump, I tried to keep an open mind. To be fair to the guy, I want to give him his due. So I'll say this as generously as I can. Aaron Cross is the human equivalent of a firm handshake that lingers just a beat too long. 38 years old, 6 feet even, good-looking in that polished way men get when they spend serious time checking themselves in mirrors. Suits that hug him just right, watches that cost more than some folks' monthly rent, and this unbreakable habit of steering every single conversation back to something he's achieved, something he owns, or some impressive place he's just been. 15 minutes into our first meeting, he dropped his MBA, his golf handicap, and the fact he'd recently attended a conference in Geneva. He said Geneva like he expected the word to sparkle on its own. I just nodded and told him, "That's wonderful, son." 6 months later, Aaron landed the CEO spot at Crosspoint Logistics, one of my subsidiaries. Solid outfit. 412 employees. Strong contracts with the biggest distribution networks around, good bones, and real underlying value. On paper, the hire looked completely clean. Recruitment firm, multiple interview rounds, reference checks, full board review, the whole process gleamed from the outside. What nobody knew, what Aaron himself still doesn't know to this day, is that I quietly pulled every string. I watched the interviews through a discreet one-way setup with the recruiters. I read every reference myself. I went over the board's notes line by line. I signed off on his pay package and the appointment. Then I drove home, changed into my old gardening clothes, and planted 3 rose bushes along the back fence like it was any other Tuesday. That evening he texted me. Big news. Just landed a huge CEO role. Serena is so proud. I typed back, hard work pays off. Congratulations, son. Well deserved. Then I set the phone down and turned on the evening news. In the beginning, I really did want to give him a fair shot. I'm not the type who sizes people up in 5 seconds flat. I've hired and mentored enough folks over the decades to know first impressions are just that first ones. People can grow. They can surprise you. I've been surprised before. Aaron didn't surprise me. Instead, he showed me, slow and steady, exactly who he was. It started small, the way these things always do. Then came the company dinner he thought was his company. One of the younger VPs, hair slicked with way too much product, asked me what I did for a living. Before I could even open my mouth, Aaron jumped in. He's retired, Serena's dad. He added with a polite little wave, "Enjoy your evening, Mr. Hayes." And just like that, I was ushered along like some confused guest who'd stumbled into the wrong conversation. I smiled, moved on, and filed it away. But the real moment, the one that shifted everything, hit on a random Tuesday afternoon about 4 months back. I'd stopped by the Crosspoint offices quietly to handle some holding company business. I was dressed like always, unremarkable old man in clean, modest clothes that nobody gave a second glance. As I passed the executive corridor, Aaron's voice drifted around the corner. He was talking to another exec, voice dripping with that easy confidence. Serena's dad? Oh, he's harmless. Poor old guy. Peaked early, I think. You know, the type was probably somebody back in the day. Now he just potters around his garden and drives that old Buick. He dropped his voice, but not nearly enough. Serena feels responsible for him, which is a lot sometimes, but what can you do? Family is family. I straightened my jacket, turned around, and walked back the way I'd come without a sound. Those 2 sentences, peaked early, and drives that old Buick, burned themselves into my head for the next 4 months. I'm a patient man, comes from a long line of them. My father used to say the river doesn't fight the rock, it just keeps flowing until the rock's gone. So I kept moving. The dinner invitation landed on a Thursday evening. Serena called, voice bright and excited the way it always gets when she's happy. Aaron's parents, Gerald and Margaret Cross, were throwing a family get-together at their place out in Westfield. Gerald used to be an investment banker. Margaret seemed to build her whole identity around how big their house was. "Dad, you'll love them," Serena told me. "They're very warm people." I already knew enough about the Crosses to make that sentence tricky for her, but I kept it to myself. I said I'd be there, and that I was looking forward to it. Then, Aaron called me directly, unusual enough on its own. He sounded friendly, casual, the tone people use right before they slide in something they know might sting. "Hey, just a heads up about Saturday. Gerald and Margaret are pretty traditional, old school. Might be worth dressing up a little? Nothing crazy, just something sharper than usual." There was a beat of silence. I answered pleasantly that I appreciated him thinking of me. He sounded relieved. "Just want everyone comfortable. You know how it is." I told him I did, and I'd see him Saturday. After I hung up, I stood in the hallway staring at my reflection in the mirror for a long moment. Then I went to the closet, pushed past the charcoal and navy suits I'd worn for big deals over the years, and pulled out my simplest, cleanest, most modest clothes instead. I laid them out for the dinner. Walked outside, patted the roof of the old LeSabre twice, like an old friend heading into battle, and thought, "We're going to a dinner, old girl. Dress code is humble. We've got that covered." Because Aaron didn't understand. Gerald and Margaret didn't understand. Nobody at that table was going to understand until it was way too late. I wasn't dressing down because I had nothing better to wear. I was dressing down because I wanted to see exactly who they really were when they thought nothing important was on the line. And I had this quiet, bone-deep feeling 40 years in the making that they were about to show me everything. I already knew exactly how that dinner was going to end, but what I didn't know was that one of them would never recover from what I was about to do. Stick around, because the real show didn't even start until dessert. Saturday rolled in quiet, the way big days sometimes do when they're fixing to flip your whole world upside down. I woke at 5:30, same as always. The old alarm clock ticking steady on the nightstand. Black coffee, no sugar, poured into the same chipped mug my dad used to use. I sat at the kitchen table with the window cracked, letting the cool morning air carry the damp smell of dew on the oak leaves outside. Watched the gray light creep over the backyard while my mind stayed perfectly still. Calm isn't loud. It's the sharpest tool I own. I dressed slow and careful, clean slacks, a plain light blue button-down I'd pressed the night before, everyday shoes that had seen better decades. No fancy watch, just me, looking exactly like the harmless old man they expected. In the hallway mirror, I caught my own eyes for a second and gave a small nod. Yeah, this was right. I stepped out to the driveway where the LeSabre sat waiting, silver paint catching the weak sunrise on its cracked passenger mirror. The engine turned over with that familiar grumpy rattle, like an old friend, clearing his throat before a long trip. I gripped the wheel, muttered under my breath, "Let's go see who these people really are," and pointed the car toward Westfield. The Cross estate sat at the end of a long private drive, lined with hedges trimmed, so sharp they looked angry. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and money. I rolled the LeSabre through the gate and parked near the front. A young guy in a crisp polo, half valet, half judge eyed the car, then me, doing quick math in his head that clearly didn't add up in my favor. "Good evening, sir," he recovered, reaching for the keys. "I can take her around back." I handed them over with a polite smile. "She pulls a little left. Don't let it rattle you." He nodded like a man trying real hard not to roll his eyes. Gerald Cross opened the door before I could knock. Tall, 72, silver hair, shoulders still broad from years of throwing weight around boardrooms. He wore that rich casual look clothes that cost more than most people's suits, but tried to pretend they were relaxed. His handshake was firm, measured, exactly long enough to say he was in charge. The house hit me the second I stepped inside. High ceilings, art chosen to impress rather than comfort, that faint polished wood and lemon oil smell that screams, "We've always had this." Every surface felt like it was quietly judging newcomers. Margaret appeared from the sitting room, put together like someone who'd spent hours making sure nothing was out of place. Her jewelry caught the light just enough to remind you it wasn't cheap. She took both my hands in hers, all warmth on the surface. "William, we've heard so much about you. You're just as sweet as Serena described." Sweet. The word landed like a pat on the head for a golden retriever. I smiled back anyway. "Thank you, Margaret. You have a beautiful home." She lit up like I'd handed her a trophy. Serena spotted me and crossed the room fast, arms wrapping around me the way she's done since she was little. I held on a beat longer than usual, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. "You look great, Dad," she whispered. "So do you, sweetheart," I said, meaning every word. Aaron slid in behind her. His eyes flicked over my outfit, that half-second wince he tried to hide behind a big recovery smile and a shoulder clap. "William, glad you made it. Gerald just opened something special." Everything that night was apparently something special. The wine, the food, the house, the family, everything except the guy in the modest clothes. We moved into the dining room. The table was set like it took a small army, and 3 hours. Heavy crystal, silverware that weighed more than it should, candles that probably only came out for performances like this. The air carried warm bread and expensive cologne. I sat, unfolded my napkin, and let myself fade into the background on purpose. 69 years had taught me the most dangerous move in a room full of people who've already decided who you are is to let them keep believing it. So I smiled, asked polite questions, complimented the wine I hadn't even tasted yet, and watched. Gerald ran the conversation like he owned the room, which, in his mind, he did. Loud, confident, talking markets, his recent Scotland trip, and how Aaron had completely transformed Crosspoint. The board respects him enormously, Gerald said, swirling his glass with that practiced flair. Leadership is in the blood, I believe. The way he looked at me when he said it carried that quiet little dig. I nodded like I was impressed. That's wonderful. You must be very proud. Margaret turned to Serena with a smile that had edges. And Serena, you must feel so secure with a husband who provides so well. It's such a blessing. Not every girl is so lucky. The table went still for half a second. Serena smiled back politely, but I caught the flicker in her eyes. I took a slow sip of water and said nothing. The envelope still hadn't come out. I knew when it did, the whole polite performance would crack wide open. I just had to wait. 2 hours of nodding, smiling, and laughing at jokes that weren't that funny. I played the part perfectly sweet old retired dad, the guy with the funny car who peaked early and spent his days poking around the garden. Wore it like a comfortable old jacket. Nobody at that table had a clue what was underneath. Then Gerald reached under his chair. I felt the shift in my gut, that quiet click when the game moves from warm-up to the real play. He slid a thick, leather-bound document across the polished wood toward me. "William," he said, voice dropping into serious mode, "there's something we'd like to discuss as a family." I looked at the folder but didn't touch it yet. Margaret's hands were folded tight. Aaron sat up straighter, trying way too hard to look casual. Serena glanced at me, nervous, then back at her father-in-law. Her fingers twisted in her lap. Gerald kept talking about Aaron's big vision, his independent company, the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. "We believe in him completely," he said. "As you should," I answered warmly. "What we need is startup capital," Gerald continued. "We're proposing Serena's inheritance as collateral. Fully legal, all drawn up properly." He leaned in. "We just need your blessing, William." As her father. I picked up the document, opened it, and read every page slow and deliberate, while the candles flickered and the wall clock ticked loud in the silence. Every number, every clause. Then I closed it gently, took another unhurried sip of water, and looked Gerald dead in the eye with my warmest smile. "I appreciate the thought that went into this," I said pleasantly. "I'll review it carefully." Gerald let out a breath he'd been holding forever. Aaron's shoulders relaxed. Margaret reached for her wine like the hard part was done. They thought they'd won. I made small talk for another 20 minutes, thanked Margaret for the evening, gave Gerald a firm handshake holding his eyes just a second longer than polite. He had no idea what that extra second meant. The young guy brought the LeSabre around. I tipped him well and watched his face change. Then I drove home through the dark streets, calm as still water, the kind of calm that would scare people who knew what was coming next. 14 days of radio silence. 14 days of them thinking they'd already won. What they didn't know was that I had already pulled the pin, and the explosion was coming in exactly 11 days. You're not going to believe what the audit actually uncovered. For 14 days, I said nothing, tended the garden, had coffee with the neighbor, went to church, drove the Buick to the store like always. On day 4, Aaron texted, checking in, all excited about the proposal. I waited 3 hours and replied, "Still reviewing, son. These things take time." Thumbs up emoji back. I set the phone down and made one quiet call to 3 senior board members at Crosspoint men who'd known me a long time. "Run the audit," I told them. "Full scope, start now." Then I went back to my roses. I'd written Aaron's contract myself 15 years earlier, including one buried clause about non-compete and fiduciary duty that he'd signed without reading close enough. The audit took 11 days. When the report landed on my desk, thick with evidence, I sat with it a long while. Not surprised, just making sure. Aaron had been building his side venture for 8 months on company time, using company contacts, company devices, everything aimed at competing directly with us. Every move documented. Every violation clear. Thursday morning, I put on the charcoal suit from the back of the closet, the one I hadn't worn in years, and drove the LeSabre to Crosspoint, parked in the reserved spot out front, the one with the small placard that read Cornerstone Group, the spot Aaron had walked past 3 times a week for 3 years, without ever asking whose it was. I walked into the conference room, sat at the head of the table, Board on one side, legal on the other, folder in front of me. 4 minutes later, the door opened. Aaron strolled in carrying that usual confidence like it was tailored to him. He scanned the room: board members, lawyers, documents, then his eyes landed on me in the suit he'd never seen. I watched the realization hit him floor by floor, slow and brutal. The interviews, the contract, the audit, the dinner envelope, everything from the last 3 years crashing down in that one moment. The silence stretched 10 full seconds. I let every one of them land heavy. "Sit down, Aaron," I said quietly. He sat. "I'm going to say this once," I told him, voice even. "Not because I'm angry. Anger is for men who didn't see it coming. I saw this from the moment you slid that car printout across my kitchen counter 3 years ago. I opened the folder. Crosspoint is owned by Cornerstone Group. Cornerstone Group is owned by me. Has been for 19 years. The company you run, the salary, the reputation you built your whole identity around, I built it. I gave you every chance. And for 8 months you used it all to try to stab the hand that fed you." I closed the folder. "The clause in your contract covers everything the audit found. We can go full legal if you want. Make it all public record." The confidence drained out of him fast. He looked small, young, a long way from Geneva. "However," I continued, "I'm not here to destroy you. I'm here for clarity. So here's what happens. You resign today. Quiet, professional, your reputation stays clean and this stays in this room. Or we take the other road." He looked at the board, then the lawyers, then back at me. What I saw in his eyes wasn't anger or fight. It was shame, real, deep, the kind that hits when a man finally sees himself clearly and hates the view. "I'll resign," he said, voice low, like the words cost him something. "Good." I stood, buttoned my jacket, picked up the folder. At the door I paused. "One more thing. That proposal your father brought to dinner using Serena's inheritance as collateral? I had my lawyers move her inheritance into her own name this morning. Irrevocable. She's the only one who can touch it now. Tell your parents thanks for dinner. The lamb was excellent." I drove home in the LeSabre, engine groaning, air conditioner half working, cracked mirror catching the afternoon light as I turned onto Elmwood Drive. I sat in the driveway a minute, just breathing. 31 years of being the man nobody noticed twice, while knowing exactly who I was the whole time. Gave the dashboard a pat. "Good girl." Then I went inside and called my daughter. She showed up 20 minutes later. I had 2 cups of tea waiting on the old wooden kitchen table. She sat across from me and studied my face the way she's done since she was 4, reading it like a map she'd memorized. I laid it all out, quiet and steady. The company, the structure, how I'd controlled the CEO search, the clause from 15 years back, the audit, the boardroom, the inheritance now safely in her name alone. Every piece. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she looked up, eyes searching mine, and asked the only question that really mattered. "Dad, why didn't you ever tell me about any of it?" I looked down at my tea, then out at the dark garden, then back at my girl, her mother's eyes, that laugh that could light up a room, the 7-year-old who once out-argued me over TV time. "Because I wanted you to choose your own life," I said, "not have it chosen by what I own. I never wanted you to look at me and see a company. I wanted you to see your father." She cried. I reached across the table and held her hand, letting her. In the back of my mind, I pictured Gerald sitting frozen in that big Westfield house, Margaret setting down her wine, Aaron trying to find the words to explain how the quiet old man in simple clothes had just turned their whole world inside out. The one person in that dining room they should never, not for one single second, have underestimated. I let all of that go, because the only thing that mattered was right across the table, my daughter. Eyes red but smiling through it, hands warm around her cup. The finest thing I ever built. Some men don't look powerful. They just are. And the ones who underestimate them, they always find out the hard way.